everybody. This is Stephanie Rupert. Thank you for joining me for episode 3 of the Meaning of Everything podcast. Now, the way that this videocast normally works is that we're talking about specific ideas about philosophy, religion, history, science, culture, what have you, with guests. But in these first few introductory episodes, and if you listen to 1 or 2, then you already know this, I am talking about the podcast itself. In episode 1, I talked about myself. I talked about my history, about who I am, about why I'm doing this. And episode 2, I talked about what I was calling the intellectual and emotional existential climate of our times, which is a complicated way of saying, like, what's our situation right now? And that elevated why this podcast, why this videocast, why the stuff that I'm trying to do here is relevant, kind of. I tried. And then here in the third and final introductory episode, I'm going to talk specifically about what you can get from this podcast, from the videocast, what I am trying to provide to you. And then, of course, how you can get me, how you can be in contact with me to help me help you, right? Because I want this to be more of a community effort. I want you to be as involved as you would like to be. So yes, without further ado, here, episode 3. To start with our mission statement. I think it's important. Something that has happened to the world over the course of the last 150 years or so is that philosophy has, and thinking in general, has become less relevant and less sexy, less exciting. And it's alive today in some circles, but ideas matter. Ideas matter deeply, and we have stopped valuing them as much as we used to. We've stopped thinking about them in our daily time. We've stopped trying to understand. We've stopped seeking understanding. And I talked in the last podcast about the emotional existential climate that we're in. I talked about why we have all this uncertainty and all these deconstructed ideas, and it's like a wasteland, and it makes us not want to look. And we have all these distractions. We have such a strong consumerist culture, and it's so easy to be distracted that we just don't want to look. But ideas matter. It matters for us on an individual level, and it matters for us on a cultural level. And so here, what I want to do is explore, deepen our understanding of what it means to be human, of what the nature of our world, to really get at what we're doing here, to understand why we're in this situation that we're in. I think one of the most important tasks, one of the most effective ways to become a better human, to become a better society, is to go through a process of deconstructing, that is, analyzing or trying to understand where we come from, why we are where we are, the types of ideas that we've inherited, the cultures we've inherited, the religious institutions we've inherited. We want to understand these, take them apart, look at them, see how they fit together, and sort of take a building. We're like taking a building down, we're deconstructing it. And then once we do that, and we understand all of that, and we can do it all at the same time, we build up something new. We can erect the most beautiful possible things that we can, because we're being intentional about it, because we're looking at who we are, we're understanding why we are the way we are, we've raised everything to the foundations, and then we are free to build what we want, to build lives for ourselves that we want, to make ourselves personally be productive and safe and cared for and connected and loving and capable of handling life, which is not always the easiest. It's never the easiest thing to do. It's the hardest thing to do, is to keep going. and yet we all do it every day, but we can do it with more ease, with more grace, with more excitement if we want. We can build these things. And then as a culture, we can do the same thing. You know, the more we learn about how we operate as a species, the more we can take advantage of what we know, the more we can build on our knowledge and build systems, build institutions, build schools and governments and courts and legal and policing systems. We can build these systems in ways that help us, that make us better versions of ourselves, instead of worse. And definitely these options exist. And the more we learn about ourselves, how we operate, why we are the way we are, how to take advantage of all this, the better systems we can build. And so that is essentially what I want to do here, is to be really smart and interesting. I want to be fascinating. I think that that's not altogether too hard. Humanity can be fascinating. I want to be fascinating, but we can also do this in a way that like matters deeply, you know, like gets to the heart of things, and to talk with guests, not just about their ideas, but how they feel and how they sit with us as human beings, and how to make sense of them and fit them into this gigantic puzzle piece that we have. You know, it's like the way I have felt since I was a child, since I was 4, and I was having these panic attacks that I told you about in episode 1. We have this life is a gigantic puzzle. And I'm the kind of human who needs to make sense of things, that really desperately wants to make sense of things. And I know not everybody does, but I'm sure a lot of people listening do. And if you don't, maybe you'll come to understand its value, or not. You can prove me that it's not valuable, and I'll, you know, go dance in a field for the rest of my life. Life is this gigantic puzzle, and there are pieces, and we can fit them together and try them with other pieces, and then reject it and take it apart again and put it together, and work slowly through being in conversation and listening, and then advocating, you know, when we need to and when it's right to, and really creating, you know, putting this puzzle together, and hopefully doing it in a way that feels good and is enriching, and all of that sort of stuff. So that's the mission. That's what we're doing here. And I don't, maybe that feels good for you. Maybe it doesn't. Feel free to never listen to another episode, but I think it matters. You know, I really do. So that's the mission. The things that things that I'm going to try to do here with the podcast, what I want to concretely deliver. The first and foremost is that I want to bring on, I already have several people queued and interviewed and what have you, who are really innovative thinkers. Now, there are a lot of podcasts in the world right now that deal with questions of meaning and deal with philosophy and what have you. But I would argue that being in the field of religion and philosophy and being in touch with it, I am intimately familiar with what's an original idea and what isn't, and what's an important idea and what isn't. And that, I think, is something that's really lacking in our like intellectual discourse today, especially like the popular stuff. And also on these shows, people bring on good thinkers, absolutely good thinkers, revolutionary thinkers, important ideas, but they're all kind of like pop icons, more or less. They're published authors. They've been on the circuit. You know, their ideas are culturally relevant because they're pop intellectual icons, but also there is so much good, really interesting and awesome thinking going on. Usually in the academy, though not always. The majority of people I will bring on here will be professors. There's amazing thinking going on, but it's not being publicized because it's being done by people who are working in the academy, you know, and it's not being done by people who enjoy being a public figure or that sort of thing. You know, they're teachers and they're researchers, and they're advancing knowledge. And I want to bridge that gap. I want to take what's actually happening, the fomenting that's actually happening in the academy, the really brilliant stuff. I want to take that and bring it, and bring more of it to the public sphere, as opposed to just the pop stuff that we encounter in popular science books and and that sort of thing, and TED Talks. That's all fine. It's all important. And I hope that we continue all to engage this content intentionally and thoughtfully, as we do with all content. But there's a lot of other really great stuff out there, really interesting stuff about who we are as a species, about whether, how to define religion and science, whether they exist the way that we think about them, how we think about other cultures, how we think about ourselves, all this sort of stuff. It's incredibly important and interesting, and not all of it is being talked about because not all of it is being streamlined to the public. So that's one thing that this podcast hopefully will do. That's unique. As a part of that, I want to talk about little known ideas, unpopular ideas, and I will do so in a way that is humble, and I'll ask hard questions, but also listen, get to the bottom of things, actually find insight even in ideas that I or we or many people disagree with. I think even when we encounter ideas that we don't like, we can learn from them, because we can learn empathy, we can learn about people's experiences, and we can enrich our own viewpoints by encountering ones that are disparate from ours, that function differently, that explore mental space in a different way, all this sort of stuff. There's a lot of learning to be done. And so I will be bringing on people who have really unique ideas, and then doing a lot of listening. As I mentioned in podcast number 2, there is a problem in our intellectual climate, and it's that one of them is that we don't really have a lot of good philosophy being done, like high quality thinking, more or less. What is high quality thinking? It's hard to say, but I really believe that engaging the field of philosophy and scholarship, generally speaking, history and what have you, is a really good way to make our ideas better. And that's not something that's happening in the public sphere right now, period. And I can do that. I can't promise that I'm the best at it, but I can do it. And when I am not good at it, I will humbly seek the help of those who are better, because philosophy is a gigantic field with tons of history, where all so much good thinking, rigorous thinking ideas have been flushed out for thousands of years, remolded, reformatted, all that sort of stuff. It's all happened. And so I will do my best to take the rigor from that and use it to come up with the best and most interesting ideas possible. Now, at the same time, I will be accountable to scientific rigor. We have this idea in our culture, and again, I discussed this more at length in episode 2, but we have this idea that the sciences and the humanities are pit against each other. You've got philosophers over here and scientists over there, and they're never going to get along, and they should be separate. And religion too, for that matter. There's a lot of really interesting, thinking and talking about that. But as good and loyal as I am to the humanities and the like, I also have training in the sciences, and I will be accountable to scientific rigor, and I will be able to bridge that gap between the humanities and the sciences in a way that isn't often done. It is, but not nearly enough. That's a really important thing that we need. Finally, what I would like to do, and I've mentioned this already, is I want to, perhaps this is obvious, I want to be entertaining. I want to be fun. I want this to be enjoyable for us. I've tried listening to a lot of podcasts and videocasts out there on various topics, philosophy and culture and what have you, religion. And the hosts, they talk like this, and they say, "Welcome to my podcast." And it's, and I think that thinking can be alive, and feeling can be alive, and vary across the spectrum of emotions. And hopefully I will be able to engage. I intend to engage with our guests as humanely, as I possibly can, to be real, to be honest, and to be authentic. I think to be able to laugh at myself and to laugh at ourselves, at our ideas and all that sort of thing. I want philosophy to, and thinking generally and talking and whatever, conversing about important things, I want it to be something that feels as richly human as, whatever, watching YouTube videos of cats or something at actually, important, being at a concert or something. So those are the types of things that I want to do. Now, topics. Finally, I'll talk about topics, and then I'll stop and I'll let you go. So, very broad themes. The meaning of everything. Like, what does that even mean? The meaning of everything. Well, I chose it intentionally because it's broad. I'm interested in questions of meaning, and it's very hard to find the words to describe what we're doing here. And this is precisely because of this divide that I've been talking about and will be incessantly talking about for ages between science and religion and spirituality and the humanities and just everything, right? Because what I believe we are doing is important, and it is existentially relevant. It's relevant to who we are as a species, to how we cope with being human, to how we make sense of things. It's existentially relevant. But it's also practically relevant, and something that we can act upon. And, the idea of meaning itself, like what is meaning? Meaning, the concept of meaning was sort of generated by the existentialists, and specifically the word first used by author Schopenhauer, who was a depressive realist, a very sad and cranky man in the mid 1800s. And he first used the word meaning. What is the meaning? Looking for the meaning of human life, and that was really recent. What does meaning even mean? But what we're looking for here is like significance, impact, understanding. Contextualization. So the meaning of everything. Like, yes, the content is really, really broad, but mostly what we're going to be dealing with is things that are like deeply relevant to who we are as a species, and things that are deal with our biggest questions and problems, right? Who are we? Where do we come from? What are we doing here? What's our purpose? But those are very broad questions, but also things that feed into that are, what is the nature of history? What is the nature of religion? How do we make sense of current events with respect to these types of questions? It's all very interconnected. So we'll talk about a lot. I will do a lot of work in understanding science. What is science? I think, there are people who tend to really overvalue and overtrust it, and there are people who tend to undervalue and undertrust it. And is science just a practice, or is it a cultural movement? And how do we relate to science? Like my dissertation at Oxford, it is on the ways in which people could be said to have religious relationships with science. And that's a thing. And one of our first guests definitely has a religious relationship with science. And so like, how do we relate to that? How do we relate to the changing data that we have about what it means to be human, So I will talk about the sciences. I will talk at length about religion. Religion is so important for us to be talking about, and it might not seem that way. You might think, oh, religion is dying out. Religion's not relevant. Goodbye, religion. But the field of religion, at least, is where we understand human beings at their most raw, at our most naked. It's how we are standing in front of existence, in front of our gods, if we have them, and seeing our weaknesses and our limitations of what it means to be human, and coming to terms with them. That's a deeply beautiful and incredibly important thing. And this is why I'm in the field of religion. And this is why I will talk about it at length. And this is why religion, in quotes, religion is not going away. We'll talk about like origins of religion. And again, that's a very complex topic. I don't even know. People ask me all the time, are you religious? Well, A, no. But also B, I don't even know if we should be, how do you define religion? That's a hugely important question that has really big impacts on our religion, our politics, our cultures, how we relate to and befriend or hate one another. It's all very important. So I will talk about religion at length. I'll talk about human evolutionary history. I'll talk about our genes. I'll talk about our cultures. I'll talk about how these two things interact, and history, and talk about how our culture is the way it is. Why are we in this situation? Politically, religiously, existentially, economically, why are we here? You know, what was the impact of Karl Marx? What was the impact of Adam Smith? Why did communism unfold the way that it did, right? What about capitalism? What about our religious institutions, the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church, churches in the East, missionaries, right? Buddhism and Taoism and everything, right? How did these things come to be? It's a deeply important question, in part because, well, A, it's interesting, but also B, like, it informs who we are and how we can be, which is, again, a theme that we will continue to revisit and revisit and revisit. And this means that debates about nature and nurture will be central. And I will argue, I have a thesis for what that needs to be. So I do have specific ideas about the relationship between nature and nurture, and I will have many people on that have opinions, and that will be a really big, that's important as well. And gender, you know, and how we've constructed those ideas, and ideas about ethnicity and race, and well, you know, why we are the way we are, as I have said, and will continue to say, you know, who we are, who we can be, and how to bridge the difference. And what we need for that is to understand, as I have said at length, you know, the meaning of everything will hopefully help us develop this better understanding of why things are the way they are, of how to make sense of them, you know, make sense of things, and therefore feel better and be better humans. You know, that's the hope. So finally, I'll wrap up quickly by talking about the podcast and how to get involved, how to get in touch. I am infinitely available. You know, I want to be available on social media and via email, or however else you want to contact me. You can email me at themeaningoferything@gmail.com. Email me questions. I will be always answering questions. And then you can find me on social media. It's Stephanie Ruper. It's my name, or stephanieruper.com. These are places where you can get in contact with me: Facebook and Instagram, Stephanie Ruper. And you can find me there, and tell me what guests you want to bring on. Ask questions for guests. I will do my best to update you on who is coming on the shows, and then you can send me questions that you have for them. All those sorts of things would be really, really helpful. I'm also going to be doing giveaways weekly. I will weekly be giving away, starting in a week or so. I will weekly be giving away a copy of a book. I will have a list of books. I do have a list of books on my website, stephanieruper.com. A list of books that I think are relevant to the discussions that we're having here. You know, relevant to meaning, relative to human understanding, relevant to philosophy, what have you. I'll have a list of books, and I will give away a copy a week. Now, of course, there is a catch. You have to leave a review of the podcast on iTunes to be entered into that giveaway. But once you're there, then you will you could win a free book. And this is hopefully a reciprocal thing. And I would love, I love giving things away. So that'll feel really good for me, and you'll be helping me and helping us and spreading the word and stuff, because I do think this matters. It's hard to ask for your help in that regard, but I have to, and I appreciate it, and I'm here and forever here for you. That's again Stephanie Ruper in all of the Facebook and Insta, and the meaning of everything at gmail.com. Thank you so much. That's how you can get in touch. I'm really excited. Coming up next, we will be having guests and talking about all these kinds of things that I have been mentioning in the last little bit, and hopefully you will love it as much as I do, because I definitely do. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can catch us on any type of podcast medium, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and also on YouTube if you prefer to look at our faces. So thank you so much. I will talk to you next time. Take care.